Hello, thank you so much for having me. It's lovely to be here, even virtually, and a special thank you to everyone who's there physically in the audience, but also to everyone who's watching remotely. And thank you so much, Ollie. So I'm here to have a discussion with Avinash Rugoobur, who is the president of Arrival, a company you may have heard of. Hi, Avinash, and welcome to the conversation. Thanks so much. I'm just going to kick off with a tiny bit of housekeeping before we get into our conversation. Just the organizers of CogX just wanted us to highlight some great benefits like the virtual networking area that you can tweet at CogX_festival on Twitter, or you can tag these conversations using the hashtag CogX 2021. So anything you find super interesting, please do tweet. You can send us questions to me, and I'll read them out through the Hopin platform. And you can also browse CogX's online bookshop for books from speakers. Sadly, I've not written a book, but other more accomplished speakers. And lastly, if you haven't already, please do download the CogX app. But without further ado, let's get started. Avinash, I thought you'd be best placed to be the person who describes a little bit more about what Arrival does for those in the audience who haven't followed your journey over the last few years.
Sure. So Arrival was actually founded in 2015. We've got over 1,900 employees all around the world with headquarters in the UK and the US. We're really pioneered a range of technologies to make electric vehicles at a competitive price to diesel equivalents. So one of the issues is as we shift over to a fully electric and zero emission future, that electric vehicles have come at a price premium. So to reduce that price premium, Arrival has designed what I like to think of as the systems that create electric vehicles. So what do I mean? I mean, we design and develop our own components. So this is hardware like the battery management system, the human machine interface, and I'll touch on why that's important for autonomy in a second. Then we have our own composite material, which is instead of using body panels, we actually replace that. Instead of using steel for body panels, we replace that with a fabric that is a really, really amazing tech that we're able to use our own internal processes and create more durable and lightweight panels than steel. But we don't need expensive metal stamping plants or paint shops. And we can also break that material back down and feed it back into the cycle. So it's fully 100% recyclable. And then we design and develop all our own software. So that's software on the vehicle. So those components I was mentioning, they're like plug and play. You can literally swap out different components. And all of the software that then goes out to the cloud. So all of the data that comes off those components, if you can imagine, we think of the vehicle as a device on wheels. All of the data we can access and bring it to the cloud. Also important for autonomy. And then we produce our vehicles in a very different approach to the typical industry, which is large factories, out in the middle of nowhere, hundreds of millions to billions of dollars in capex. We're actually able to produce our vehicles in low footprint, low capex micro factories. These are, under 50 million for each factory, around about 20,000 square meters, and we can place them anywhere. We can take existing warehouses and convert them to production facilities. So we have 4 already announced. We have one in Bicester in the UK, we have one in Madrid, and we have 2 in the US. So it's really a transformative company that's producing best-in-class electric vehicles at a similar price to diesel. We have a bus, a van, a large van, and a car that we recently announced a partnership with Uber with. And we have an order backlog of over 1.2 billion in orders. So really something very different to the traditional industry.
And just to give, I'll come on to autonomous tech in a minute, but just to give people an idea of how new this stuff is, how future-facing it is, we're not seeing Arrival vans out on the streets at the moment, are we? When might we start to see, those electric vehicles out and about?
Yeah, so we start with the Arrival bus, which will be coming to market in Q4 of this year. And next year we have our start of production for our van, both our smaller 4-ton van and our larger van in the second half of next year. And our car will be in production at the end of 2023. But prior to that, we've already announced a trial with First Group in the UK, with UPS, one of our customers, and has ordered up to 10,000 vans. They're already been working with us for many years and be testing vans in the summer. And so, I think you'll be seeing Arrival vehicles quite shortly on the road, and start of production will begin from later this year.
But you're not standing still, it sounds like. You are also developing and experimenting with autonomous tech, so sort of commonly known as driverless tech, although it sounds like you're exploring different bands within that. Can you tell us a little bit about, the direction of travel there for Arrival? And I understand there may be some footage that you can show us as well.
Yeah, so I think it's important to note that in our segment, the commercial vehicle segment, we are still see the need for the human in the loop, right? So when you are delivering packages, for example, it's really important that you have a human driver and you're able to deliver the packages. Same in the bus, that safety and security factor is really important. So we still see the human an integral part of the commercial vehicle segment. What we're looking at doing is initially we use advanced safety systems, ADAS and autonomy to aid that operation. So if you think about where our initial deployment is, where we'll be having depot autonomy, and we'll show a video on this in a bit. And that means how all the vehicles will operate inside the depot. So moving a bus from the cleaning station to the charging station, or a van out to the loading station, all of that in a controlled environment can be done today using today's technology. As we know, we don't have full road-going autonomous technology yet, although we've got many companies working on that. I used to be part of a GM Cruise, and that's really looking at the retail segment, but this is very much in commercial. It's a very different use case, and it helps us reduce the operational costs and introduce safety into the depot environment. And the second thing you're going to see is a really exciting development called RoboRace, which is a autonomous racing platform. Arrival has its own racing team in that, and we also partner on the technologies. And what that is pushing autonomy to the extreme. So we have a Guinness World Records for the fastest autonomous car. It's a racing series where you're looking at adding new technology and different software algorithms to be able to go as fast around the track as you can. The Arrival racing team has been racing Lucas Di Grassi, who's a ex-Formula One and Formula E driver and Le Mans podium winner. And so you'll see some really extreme tech there. And the reason for that is we're looking at these two bookends. And in the middle is a lot of the full road-going autonomy using current technology, which, as we know, hasn't yet hit a steady state or even a rollout. And then we can talk after the video about some of the reasons that our platform allows autonomy to be added over time as more and more technology is released. So probably worth showing the videos, I guess.
Why don't we run through a little bit about what was going on there briefly in that video before we show people the really sexy stuff?
All right, sure, yeah.
I mean, that's clearly intended to make a driver's life easier. Just walk me through what's happening in that video. What are the technological advancements that were required to because from the outside that looks really simple, but obviously that's taken a huge amount of complex work to make that happen.
Right, so that's a partnership with Innovate UK and the Centre for Connected and Autonomous Vehicles. So that's our RoboPilot project, which is looking at bringing the initial rollout of autonomous technology into a depot. So if you look at the current state of autonomous tech, when you have a controlled environment, so where you can clearly mark lines, when you know what sort of weather conditions you're going to get, and you're able to control the operational use case, you'll find that the technology available today can actually run that scenario very well. And so this is our first foray into doing that. And so we're demonstrating driverless functionality there for the Arrival van. And then that's going to actually be adapted for our planned future rollout of larger trucks and buses. And the next step here is actually that's in the depot. We will start to do on-road testing of that autonomous platform as well. And it's it's about fully functional parcel depot, and the vehicle's maneuvering around the facility without a human driver. As I mentioned earlier, taking it from different parts of the operational side. And it does increase the operational effectiveness and safety, and just helps the driver's life inside that operation.
And is there something about doing it in this very controlled environment? There's been a number of news stories recently about, Waymo, perhaps among the most advanced, but a few other companies really bowing out of the consumer-facing driverless cars race, or really slowing it down, having really piled a lot of money into it. And part of it is that, a drop of blossom can maybe send a driverless car out of whack, but a depot is a much more controlled environment. So can you talk a little bit about how that environment is maybe a bit more conducive to some of this autonomous technology?
Yeah, so as soon as you have a controlled environment, it starts even being able to map it more simply, exactly where everything's going to be. Typically, those big items don't just randomly get up and move by themselves, so you know exactly where they're going to be, where the vehicle has to go. When you have the controlled environment, I mentioned like clear lane markings, for example, it also means humans aren't going to interact in that space. Obviously, you have the safety systems in case, but by nature, depots and places like that are very controlled in terms of where humans walk, and so you're able to introduce that safety system, and the complexity is just reduced. So you don't have, you mentioned a blossom, but snow or anything like that can really right now trip up both the sensor suite and the algorithms through false positives. Means that you can really control the autonomous autonomous rollout in a much more simplified fashion. But the beautiful thing about the commercial vehicle segment is that has applications now, right? That helps reduce operational complexity for operators, and I think that's a very important point. The commercial vehicle segment has real world everyday use cases more than just moving into replacing the ride hailing industry. It's a very different use case, and it allows us to commence with that first. I don't know if you've ever seen a bus depot, but watching people trying to move all the buses around to coordinate it at the end of day or start of day is quite an adventure. Similar, if you can imagine, large van depots. So it really does have an immediate impact.
Just something I wanted to pull out a bit is the role of the human in all of this. That there have been lots of worries with other companies who shall remain unnamed, who kind of fairly openly said their goal was to get rid of the driver, because the driver for that particular business model, let's say cabs or taxis, is an additive cost that undermines the business model. So actually, in the long term, if you can cut out the driver, that's good for certain kinds of business models. For a rival, if I was a truck driver or a van driver, I might look at this technology and ask, what's the role that's there for me? How do you answer that question in terms of eventually cutting out the human?
Like anything involving autonomous or robotics, we have to be very thoughtful in what does it mean for the displacement of people, right? And that's a really critical question that, as an industry and with governments and with the people and public we serve, it's a very important topic of conversation that needs to really come to the forefront over the next few years, because this technology is coming. In our case, though, as I mentioned earlier, what I would say is, hey, your role is critically important here, as the driver. And it's about, for us, augmenting and adding safety systems to make your life easier, less fatiguing. It's a very difficult job, right? Whether it's a bus driver or a truck driver or a van driver, it's extremely stressful. And so you see that there's the ability to roll out parts of these technologies, like, if you're a bus driver, knowing that there's a bicycle next to you and the system helps you not pull out, that's technology that I see has a real societal benefit to it, and you can extrapolate that forward. But we need the driver. We want the driver in the vehicle. I did mention, for example, if you're a truck driver, van or truck driver, you're really going to be you really still need to deliver the packages. You still have an important role to play in safety and security. And these aren't things that, at least in our segment, we're looking to replace.
And then a little bit on the timeline, because you've spoken about sort of when we might expect to see the EVs out on the roads. When might we see them embedded with some of this autonomous tech?
Yeah, so the beauty of our hardware approach is that our hardware is upgradable. So I mentioned the components that we build in house. So, the battery management system, human machine interface, the compute platform, and I keep doing this with my hands because it's all shaped like a box, and it's really, really interesting compared to the traditional approach where you have a lot of different suppliers, all with different dimension type components, and you're trying to fit it. And in an engineering world, you're trying to spend a lot of time packaging all these sort of different dimensioned components. Whereas for us, because we design them in-house, it's all a grid base. So everything is in a grid, it's in a box. And with the plug and play software layer, it allows us to change them. So we can take something out and put it back in. So that's really important from hardware and software, because the hardware cycle for autonomy isn't yet stable, and it's changing, every 12 to 18 months. And there's no vehicle architecture out there that can deal with that. You can't go and upgrade your vehicle's hardware. We just got to some vehicles being able to be upgraded by software. So the Arrival platform, you can do both. So as the hardware evolves, we're able to take out components and switch them in as needed. So we call all of our platforms autonomous ready. So from day one, that includes the bus, that's the van, that's the car, they're all autonomous ready. And then in terms of the depot operations that we just showed in the video, that will actually be coming as we launch the van next year. So because it's, again, controlled environment, known operation, we can actually roll that out. And then over time, we'll add more and more technology and capability to those platforms.
How much demand are you seeing from customers for that kind of advanced technology? Is that something that's really attractive, or wait and see how these technologies develop and consumer understanding of, or even driver understanding of how these things work and their appetite sort of socially as much as anything for them? Are you finding that your potential customers are actually quite keen for autonomous tech?
Yeah, it's a great question. We work very closely with the operators. So we have drivers coming in, seeing our vehicle. We work with them on how high the step height needs to be to reduce fatigue. Like, we're really design oriented around that user experience. And everything in all the conversations we've had is the excitement, from the operator. It's about, how do I have a, safer, easier depot to operate, the logistical nightmare of coordinating across that. But again, humans still in the loop. You can drive the van to the charging station, but somebody's still going to interact with that vehicle to charge it and etc. and load it and clean it. And then on the driver side, the ability to reduce that stress level and make their lives easier has been positively. I would say that the feedback has been extremely positive. So it's always about working closely with the people that are being affected by this. In this case, positive impact, but still working with them to understand, where should we fine tune the technology? What are their key concerns as they go through the day to day? What are the, some of the issues, like bus drivers have to look at the side view mirrors. I think it's every 8 seconds or something like that. So designing around those sorts of applications and safety, I think it's really crucial.
Why don't you tell us a little bit more about the competition? You touched on it a bit earlier in our conversation, but this is something that's a bit more experimental for you guys, and hopefully we can direct people to a YouTube link or something afterwards so that people can see. But tell me a little bit about why Arrival's doing Robo Race, what it is you've developed.
Yeah, so trust me, it is really cool. So hopefully people can go and see it after this. But if we talk about depot autonomy, and then the next rollout is in the retail segment, where you're seeing, road going autonomous for things like taxis. In the advanced stage, there is a whole bunch of technology opportunities that no one has quite got a grip on yet, right? And so while we believe that commercial vehicle segment will get to the adoption of autonomy starting already. We'll start first, but the retail segment will be faster to move fully to autonomous, right? Because of the reasons that we've been discussing today. And so what's really important to us is we understand, as we're building these platforms, what are the potential future technologies that are going to impact that? How should we be thinking about those technologies? How can we build that into the system in terms of the upgradability, et cetera, that we've been discussing? But also, what happens when you remove the LiDAR, for example? What happens when you write new algorithms that are really extreme and you're trying to go for a full AI, for example, we need a safe way to test all of that tech at the extreme level. So, RoboRace is actually a racing series built on autonomous technology that allows the vehicles to race each other without a human driver, and literally pushing it to as extreme as you can. And as you can imagine, when the Arrival racing team is taking on a Formula E driver, the amount that we're learning about how the vehicle should corner, how it should manage slip, how should it accelerate out of a turn, and we're pushing that to racing level speeds. I mean, it really is incredible, and it's incredible learning that we can then take back and feed it into our autonomous rollout. So we, as Arrival, aren't going to go. You made the mention earlier, right, about some of the other folks that are committing and have committed billions into this, and we still don't yet have that sort of real deployable first use case. We're not going to get involved in that part. We are looking at two bookends around it. So that's where RoboRace comes in, and it's in partnership. We've got universities like MIT also racing against us, and all of those algorithms can actually be used for real world.
What does happen if you remove the LiDAR? Is that something that you guys tested out?
Yeah, we test all sorts of things. We don't hide some of the fun parts of that, where we've seen algorithms where the vehicle just goes straight into a wall. We've seen the car spin. But all of those, that's the beauty of doing this, because that's where you want to do it. But, most recently, over, I would say, the last 6 or so months, the progress is it's incredible. Like, we are competitive now with one of the fastest drivers in the world. And you think about what that means, the complexity of human driving and how many inputs are going on, wherever the tires are changing or water introduced on the track. To be competitive, I think, is really groundbreaking. To me, it's like the Google Go, the DeepMind event, right? Like it's really showing that this technology has amazing real-world applications. I will say about autonomy, the one thing, we talked about some of the sort of social, ethical aspects, but the other thing is about how it's a regional tech as far as we can see right now. So what works in San Francisco and maybe sunny Arizona doesn't mean it's going to work in Alaska with snow, or Russia or any other place where the weather is very different, and the cities that you see are all very different. Just because something works in London doesn't mean it's going to work in Barcelona or Mumbai. And so we see that initial rollout of these vehicles really being regional based. We don't yet have that AI system that can just figure this out naturally and just work out what it needs to do. So RoboRace really just helps us understand, from all sorts of different extremes, what the vehicle could face in real world operation.
We spoke a little bit in a previous chat about the murky middle. How optimistic are you, given there have been some setbacks with driverless vehicles? Some optimistic CEOs were predicting that we'd all be in driverless taxis within 5 years, and that was 5 years ago, and it maybe hasn't quite happened. How optimistic are you that we will sort of soonish get to a place where we are accustomed to driverless cars? I'm now talking a little bit more on the consumer side, so I'm asking for a little bit of speculation there, but how optimistic do you feel about technology and its mainstreaming?
So it's gonna take a long time until autonomy is ubiquitous and all vehicles are autonomous, right? That's for sure. Will it get there eventually? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the technology is progressing at a rate where the initial application of in the retail segment, for example, will come, and has already started. There are driverless rides now being taken. They're not yet, all year round, all weather conditions in any city yet. Of course, that's going to take some time. So then the question becomes, how will people adopt to the technology? And interestingly, we have found that with autonomous technology, people initially feel quite scared. It's pretty natural. But the trust in the system happens quite quickly after that. And my personal view is, this is a TV and a radio moment, right? TV didn't kill the radio. There will still be at least for the foreseeable future, a mix, a hybrid. And how that works, we haven't quite figured this out yet. Everybody is moving to the starting line of this tech. And then what happens when the autonomous technology, because it's on such a rapid cycle, what happens when some autonomous technologies have more capability than other technologies, other autonomous vehicles, and how do you keep them all up to speed, and do you need to, and what does it actually mean for the city planning and how you manage traffic and safety even over time? And then when you start to think about the complexities of doing that in a Johannesburg and a Bangalore and a London and a New York, I mean, the complexities continue to multiply. So this is going to take a lot of time, and it's going to take a lot of real discussions with governments and society to really roll this technology out properly. The benefits are tremendous, and just putting aside the business case aspect, because obviously there are other considerations there that you mentioned about, in that side at least, removing the driver. But the safety side of this is, it is real. I mean, we do lose a lot of people. We have a lot of healthcare burden due to, accidents on road, and it does have the opportunity to help that. I would like to believe that any autonomous vehicle will be electric or zero emission. So there is a sustainability and environmental aspect to that. But there are ethical discussions still to go on this technology, absolutely. And that's what I call the empty middle, just to be clear.
You've touched on it sort of off and on through the chat, but what for you are the climate impacts of autonomous tech, both positive and negative for the short term?
Yeah, when you look at where we're going right now, it comes back to Arrival's vision, actually, this part, which is, if you see the mobility systems that we've created all around the world, I mean, there are places where you've got to ask yourself, how did we get here? Why? I mean, London's pretty incredible because we have such a good public transportation system, and but there are cities around the world where you'll be sitting in traffic just to get 10 kilometers or 10 miles, you'll be there for an hour, right? It just doesn't make any sense. And you look at the type of vehicles we've designed, we actually haven't designed vehicles that are fit for that purpose. What we've done is constrain those types of vehicles to the manufacturing system, because that manufacturing system, the old manufacturing system, needs to create hundreds of thousands of vehicles to generate any sort of profit, because you're spending so much on these large factories. We're basically building these segments in mass, and then we're just sending them all around the world and expecting people to just adapt to that. And what we are doing is saying, we're turning that question on its head and saying, well, if you can produce if you have a micro factory in your city and you can produce vehicles using our different technologies for any vehicle type, we do have a bus, a van, and a car right now, but the idea here is systems that make any type of vehicle produced in a local, low-cost, low-footprint microfactory. Then when I'm traveling around and I'm in different cities, I will no longer see the same type of vehicles. What I'll see are vehicles that match the needs of that city. And that could be anything. I mean, it's quite mind-bending to think about it. But if, let's say, you're working with a city, and right now we're working with the city of Charlotte on this. Let's say you have a city that wants really to reduce the number of vehicles inside their city, but the types of transportations are normally one person or two people or three people. You could literally customize a vehicle that enables that. But unless and until those vehicles are green, when you add those two problems of vehicles that pollute with vehicles that don't match the mobility needs of the city, then you have a problem. And that's where we are today in so many cities around the world. I don't think I need to tell the people listening that if you travel around and you see the types of pollution and the types of vehicles all around the world with sometimes one person in there, and millions of people in cities driving around, it just doesn't make any sense. And we needed to do something to change that.
Are you finding that most cities or governments that you're interacting with are quite early in their thinking around, be it regulatory or experimenting with, emissions reduction when when they're speaking to you? How advanced are you finding sort of various governments around the world?
I am finding almost without fail, which is very confidence building in where the world needs to go. And we've also seen many governments take actions, right? The UK government, the US government. We've seen governments really push forward. And, a lot of that for us is we can also build it locally and sustainably. And that, I think, is a nice loop that sort of closes that loop. It's not just that we can bring cleaner emission vehicles to the city and customize them for your needs, but we can build them locally. So you have a nice sort of closed loop system that the governments can really get behind. So we've seen very positive. In fact, we've had conversations with governments that publicly haven't said anything, but are really pushing forward with this. And I think it's just the way that something has happened, right? I remember when we were having these discussions about an electric future, maybe 7-8 years ago. Everyone was like, nah, it's not going to happen. We've got plenty of oil, et cetera, et cetera. And now I don't think anyone wants to commit to a future where it isn't zero emission and it isn't clean air and it isn't sustainable. So I've seen like a switch go off, and whether that's governments, we've seen public policy, whether that's companies that are purchased, at least in our segment, commercial vehicle segment, going out and purchasing their next batch of vehicles, their own internal ESG goals, and then the investment community behind that, and society, people, demanding that things change. You're seeing a very unique sort of three trends colliding, and I see that it's going to happen. It's just a question of when. And with Arrival removing that initial purchase barrier to going electric, at least in this segment, we believe we can accelerate that adoption. So you should be making a decision that's good for your people, the business, and the planet. And with these Arrival vehicles, yeah, you can do that.
One question about sort of Arrival and its decision to be a European-based company. My understanding is that certainly China and the US are much more advanced than Europe in terms of their appetite more broadly for electric vehicles. What was the thinking behind choosing Europe as the basis, the headquarters for Arrival? And what do you feel may be lacking in infrastructure or investment that could really bring Europe up to speed with these other continents?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it was an interesting. So if you think about, obviously in the US, Tesla really started something. It started like a movement, right? And China has been forward thinking in terms of where they want their technology and environment to go anyway. So I wouldn't necessarily say that it was a miss on understanding what the strategy was, whether that was from governments or otherwise, or policy. But it was more of a case like we needed to move the local companies, whether new or incumbents, to this new world, right? And so for Arrival, we just said we're just going to go out and do it, and will be the impetus to drive that change. And I think, but we also thought about doing it from a blank sheet. We didn't want to take any legacy, and because you've got to be fair to the companies too. It's hard. You've spent billions of dollars in these factories and all of these architectures, and then you're just saying, okay, I'm going to just turn all of that off and shift over. It's a very difficult decision. When you're starting from scratch, you design it to be that way. You design it with the future that you want in mind. That's how you design your company and your technology. And so, without that legacy, we were able to do that. In the UK and Europe, I mean, the talent's incredible, right? You have automotive industry here. You have the software industry here. You have the financing, like fintech industry here. And for us, we're a tech company, but we're sort of a combination of so many different things. We're an automotive company, a manufacturing company, an ESG company. We're a tech company, like I said. We're a robotics, hardware, software company. Combining all of that is, the UK was a great place to do that. But it is important that, Arrival is a global company. So we do have a US headquarters, and we'll have more over time, because if I loop back to that point of designing things, not from here, that we say the rest of the world needs to go and adopt the way we think about it, but working locally with the societies and governments that are going to deploy these technologies, you will see Arrival spread out and be global in that sense. I want product development to be driven from a variety of different regions and countries and cities.
Do you anticipate other, you yourself came from obviously the more advanced tech unit of a legacy auto manufacturer. Do you see them following suit in terms of the business model that Arrival is pioneering, this kind of micro factory model?
I hope so. I mean, I often get asked, "Are you worried about folks copying you and all of that?" And the answer is no. It's good. Um, we need to move. We know the system doesn't work. We know that even the business model that you're bringing up. I mean, it's tough, right? Running an auto company is tough. You're always in a precarious position. I've got to spend billions on a factory. Think about that 3 years in advance. I've got to spend hundreds of millions in an architecture. Somehow I have to make all of that work, and I get very low margins. I require mass production on using economies of scale to get low margins. So it's a tough business. And so I think when you see the agility that we can bring, just think of a microfactory. You can scale it out in parallel. You don't have to worry about building a factory 4 years from now and billions. You say, we want one here, 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 and here, and you just go take warehouses and off you go. And then as you use the systems thinking to make these vehicles, then you can enter different market segments quicker. And if they're all built by the same microfactory, you can then react to changing demands bigger because the factory will pay itself off much faster. And then if you want to change the vehicle types, you can change them. You've got all the quote unquote Lego pieces, the system. So I think it would be, I think it's the future model. I think what Arrival's doing is a step change in industry, and I welcome it.
Well, hopefully we'll see some Arrival vans out and about on our streets in the next year or two. Very excited to see that future vision. In the meantime, thank you so much, Avinash, for your time. It's been amazing to speak to you and kind of learn everything you're doing in the autonomous tech space. And thanks so much, everyone in the audience, for joining us.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Shona.
Cheers.